The Lantern in the Woods. On the outskirts of a small, forgotten village, there was a dense forest that everyone in town avoided. The trees there were twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. But what the villagers feared most was the old, abandoned cabin that lay deep within the woods. The cabin had been deserted for decades, yet every night a faint light could be seen flickering in one of its windows. A single lantern, glowing eerily in the dark. No one knew who or what lit the lantern, and no one was brave enough to find out. One cold October night, a young man named Ethan, new to the village and curious about the local legends, decided to uncover the truth. He had heard the stories from the locals, but he didn't believe in ghosts or curses. Armed with only a flashlight and a sturdy stick, he ventured into the woods. As Ethan walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence surrounded him. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under his feet. He found the cabin with little trouble. It stood out against the dark trees, its roof sagging and walls weathered with age. Just as the villagers had said, a lantern was glowing softly in the window. Ethan hesitated for a moment before approaching the cabin. He could feel the weight of the forest pressing in around him, as if the trees were watching his every move. Shaking off his unease, he pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was just as old and dilapidated as he'd expected. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like veils. The lantern, now dimmer than it had appeared outside, sat on a table in the center of the room. As Ethan approached it, he noticed something strange. A thick book lay open next to the lantern, its pages filled with handwritten notes in a language he couldn't understand. Before he could examine it further, the door slammed shut behind him, and the lantern's flame flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Ethan fumbled with his flashlight, but it refused to turn on. Panic set in as he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. A low, whispering voice echoed through the cabin, speaking in that same unknown language. The words were soft, but filled with malice, and Ethan could feel their sinister intent. He backed away from the table, his heart pounding, but his foot caught on something, and he fell to the ground. As he scrambled to his feet, the whispering grew louder, more insistent, until it was deafening. Ethan covered his ears, but the sound only grew more intense. Desperate, he ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The cabin seemed to be alive, trapping him within. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, replaced by a single chilling word spoken in English: "Leave." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. The door flew open as if on its own, and he bolted out into the night. The woods, once silent, now seemed alive with movement, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and shadows darting between the trees. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, not stopping until he was out of the forest and back in the village. Breathless and shaken, Ethan tried to tell the villagers what had happened, but they simply shook their heads. "The lantern keeps the spirits at bay," an old man finally explained. "But now that you've disturbed it, they'll be free to roam." That night, and every night after, the light in the cabin was no longer a soft, welcoming glow. Instead, it burned with a harsh, angry fire, casting eerie shadows that danced at the edge of the forest. And in the quiet of the night, if you listened closely, you could hear the whispers, calling out to anyone foolish enough to enter the woods again.